Hello Flight Simmers and welcome back to Alpha Hotel Flight Simulator Training. This is lesson 18 and the final video in our VFR or private pilot training series. In this video we'll talk about the final step you need to take in the real world to get your license, the private pilot check ride. Like with many training courses and programs you encounter in life, pilot training for a certificate or rating culminates with a test for you to demonstrate to an evaluator that you have adequate knowledge and proficiency to safely exercise the privilege of the certificate you've trained for. In aviation, these tests are called check rides, and in this video we'll take a look at what you would expect to see on a typical private pilot check ride. In the U.S., an FAA inspector can conduct check rides, but most of the time they are conducted by FAA-selected Designated Pilot Examiners, or DPEs. DPEs are usually experienced flight instructors that the FAA has chosen to be able to conduct evaluations for certificates and ratings on its behalf. They're not FAA employees, but they do answer to the FAA and must conduct check rides according to the FAA standards. Most check rides have two elements: an oral exam or questioning session, and a practical test or flying demonstration. The oral portion is where you sit down with the DPE and they test your knowledge to make sure you know what you need to know to safely exercise the privileges of the certificate you're seeking. The practical portion is where you get in the airplane and go flying with the DPE. You'll demonstrate many of the maneuvers you've done over the course of your training and show that you have sufficient mastery of the skills you'll need to safely exercise the privileges of your certificate. A check ride for a certificate or rating in the U.S. is conducted using the Airman Certification Standards, or ACS, though some ratings or certificates are still using the older Practical Test Standards, or PTS. The ACS serves as a guide for both applicants and DPEs as how the ride will be conducted. The ACS is divided into several areas of operations designated with Roman numerals, and each area of operations is subdivided into several tasks designated with letters. Some areas of operations or tasks may not be applicable to the certificate or rating that you're taking your ride for, so those will be omitted. For example, since area of operations 10 is multi-engine operations in the private pilot ACS, it would be omitted on the single engine land check ride we're simulating in this video. Each task is divided into sections labeled knowledge, risk management, and skills. During the oral portion, the examiner should ask one question from each of these sections. During the practical portion, the knowledge and risk management sections set the expectations of how you should demonstrate knowledge of the maneuver and exercise proper risk management before and during your performance of it. The skills section lists the criteria that you have to meet to consider the maneuver satisfactory, including things like altitudes, speeds, and headings. Areas of operations 1 through 3 are primarily areas that will be evaluated on the oral portion of the exam, with the rest of the operations being things that, for the most part, will be demonstrated during the practical test, though some of them may come up on the oral as well. The FAA has also moved to using scenario-based training and evaluation, so you can expect the entire check ride to revolve around a scenario that evolves as the check ride progresses. The ride will begin when you meet your examiner. Most are very nice people with a genuine interest in seeing you succeed, so they may engage in some brief small talk to help you feel at ease. After this, you'll go over paperwork. They'll verify that your photo ID, student pilot certificate, and medical certificate are in order. You'll also have completed an application on the Integrated Airman Certificate and Rating Application System, or IACRA, though you can also use a paper form called an 8710. They'll review the application to verify that you meet the general eligibility requirements for the certificate, which we'll talk about in just a second. They'll also make sure that you meet the aeronautical experience requirements for the private pilot certificate. They'll review your logbooks and make sure the hours on the application agree with what's in your logbook and that you have all the endorsements you need to take the check ride. You're also required to take a computer-based knowledge test prior to taking the check ride and pass with a score of at least 70%, so they'll need that report as well. The examiner will review your knowledge test report, and it's a solid bet they'll want to ask some questions on topics on which you got questions wrong on the computer test. They'll also expect you to demonstrate that the aircraft you're using for the check ride is airworthy, so you'll need to be able to show them that all the required documents are on board and that all of its required inspections are up to date. So let's talk a little bit about the eligibility and aeronautical experience requirements you need to get a private pilot's license in the real world. As far as the general eligibility requirements, you need to be at least 17 years of age to take the Checkride. You need to be able to read, speak, write, and understand the English language. You need to hold a student, sport, or recreational pilot certificate at the time you take the Checkride. Most people come to the Checkride with a student pilot certificate, but you can also upgrade a sport or recreational pilot certificate. You need to obtain the appropriate logbook endorsements from a CFI. There are several that are specific to taking the Checkride, and you need to make sure that all those are in order before you show up for your Checkride. You need to pass the required knowledge test, which we just talked about. You need to meet the aeronautical experience requirements, which we'll talk about here in just a second. And then, of course, you need to pass the Checkride to get the certificate. As far as the aeronautical experience requirements, this is how many flight hours you need in your logbook to take the Checkride. You need a minimum of at least 40 hours of total flight time. Most people are usually up around 60 hours when they take the Checkride, but 40 hours is the minimum that you need under general flight rules. You need 20 hours of flight training or 20 hours with your instructor, and that has to include 3 hours of cross-country flight training. Most people get a little more, but 3 hours is the minimum. 3 hours of night flight training, and there's more specific requirements as to what has to happen during your night flight training, and we talked about that during our night flying video. 3 hours of instrument flight training. We haven't done that in this video series because we're going straight into instrument flight training, so we'll be covering that in that. But you do need at least 3 hours of training on flying solely by reference to instruments during your private pilot training. And then you also need 3 hours of flight training specifically in preparation for the Checkride, and then has to occur within the 2 months preceding the Checkride. You also need 10 hours of solo flight time or flight time on your own with no instructor on board, and that has to include 5 hours of solo cross-country time. Usually you do 2 solo cross-country trips. And then one of those cross countries has to be at least 150 miles total length, and then you also have to have landing or one leg that's at least 50 miles between the point of departure and the point of landing. And then you have to have 3 takeoffs and landings to a full stop at a towered airport all by yourself. Once all the paperwork is done, the check ride will begin in earnest. Again, the examiner will use a scenario to start the ride. We'll use a sample scenario for this video. We'll assume that the examiner tells you that you're planning a day VFR flight from our home base in Pine Bluff, Arkansas to West Memphis, Arkansas. You're flying a family member out there to meet up with one of their friends, have some lunch, and then fly back. With that, you'll go get a weather briefing and plan your flight. Some examiners may even tell you what the flight scenario will be a few days ahead of time so you can plan the flight in advance, and all you have to do when you show up is plug in the weather. You'll also be expected to show that the aircraft is within weight and balance limits as you have it loaded for the flight. Once you've completed your flight plan, the examiner will review it for accuracy and then start the questioning session. Most of the questions will revolve around your scenario, but there may be some rote memory questions as well. So here's some examples of questions you might find on a typical private pilot oral exam. Suppose as you're conducting your pre-flight for this flight, an FAA inspector comes up to you and begins to conduct a ramp check. They ask to see your documents. What documents are you legally required to carry on your person to be legal to fly? They also want to see the aircraft documents. So what documents have to be on board the aircraft for it to be legal? Suppose that the Cessna 152 you normally rent from this school is not available today. The only aircraft that's available is the DR400. Are you legal to fly that aircraft? What does the school require you to do to be able to fly that aircraft? What do you think is necessary for you to be able to feel safe and proficient to fly that aircraft? What if the only aircraft that's available today is the Cessna 172 with the G1000 panel? What if it's the G36 Bonanza? What if the only aircraft that's available today is the G58 Baron? What are you required to do to maintain currency in your aircraft? Suppose you're conducting your pre-flight inspection and you discover that the ADF radio is inoperative. Can you still legally depart on the flight? What do you have to do before you depart? What if the piece of inoperative equipment is the VOR radio? What if it's one of the nav lights? What if it's the airspeed indicator? The weather forecast today was for good VFR weather, scattered clouds at 7,000, light winds, and good visibility. What if the weather forecast were to be 3,500 broken and 5 miles visibility? What if it were 1,500 overcast and 3 miles visibility? Where did you get your weather briefing or weather information for this flight? How much fuel are we going to burn on this flight, and how much did you load on the aircraft? What cruise altitude did you select for this flight, and why did you pick that altitude? Suppose a line of storms developed east of the White River after we reach our cruise altitude. What would you plan to do? What kind of airspace is at Pine Bluff? What are the minimum VFR visibility and cloud clearance requirements in that airspace? What about over here along the Arkansas River? What is this magenta area up around Little Rock? What are the altitudes that airspace is located at? What are these blue hatched areas to the north of Little Rock? What about this blue dashed circle? What about this red hatched area up to the north? What is this shaded area around Elmira Airport? If you have difficulty seeing Holly Grove Municipal or the town, what are other ways you can identify this checkpoint? What is this blue circle around Memphis? What about the red one? What are the equipment requirements to operate in this airspace? What are the pilot certification requirements? Do you plan to navigate through the airspace or around it? If you plan to navigate through the airspace, what do you need to do? If you need to talk to air traffic control, what frequency are you going to contact them on? Tell me everything you can about your destination airport. How can you get weather information there? What's the field elevation? Is the runway lighted? How long is it? Does it have fuel services? What is this little flag that's sticking out of the airport symbol here? Are there any temporary flight restrictions along our route today? Who do you talk to determine that? You woke up this morning with some mild head congestion. Do you feel safe to fly? Can you legally take any medications for that and still be legal to fly? What if you didn't get much sleep last night? Talk me through your thought process in determining your fitness for flight. You can also expect some rote memory questions on things like aerodynamics, aircraft systems, and aeromedical factors. The oral exam typically lasts about an hour, and you generally won't move on to the practical portion if you don't pass the oral. Once the question session is over, it's time to go flying. As you move to the aircraft, a key point to keep in mind about the practical test is that the overall goal of the Checkride is to make sure that you're going to be a safe, competent operator once you're licensed. They want to see you use good procedures, use checklists, and fly to standards, but they also want to make sure that you operate safely at all times and use good judgment. The examiner might observe your pre-flight, then it's time to get going. You'll start up, taxi out, do an engine run-up, and then take off on your cross-country. The first takeoff will probably be a normal takeoff, but they could ask to see a short or soft field takeoff as well. They'll expect to see you use proper pattern procedures for your departure and let you begin navigating on your flight plan and climb to your selected cruise altitude. Once you level off, they'll let you navigate for a little bit in straight and level, probably to your first checkpoint or so to make sure they're confident in your navigational skills. After that, they're likely to inject something into the scenario that will force you to divert from your destination, maybe a line of storms forming in front of you or your oil temperature spiking. In our example, we'll assume that we decide to divert to Stuttgart Municipal Airport. Once you've executed the diversion and the examiner is confident that you can make your way to your divert airport, that portion of the ride will be discontinued. The rest of the tasks can be accomplished in any order the examiner wants to accomplish them, so this is just an example of how things might happen. We'll assume that since we're already at altitude, we'll do the high altitude air work first. The examiner would likely start by asking you to perform some steep turns. You'd probably follow this up with slow flight that demonstrate recovery from a power on and power off stall. With each maneuver, the examiner is evaluating not only that you perform the maneuver to standards, but that you set it up correctly and that you're safe at all times. You are allowed momentary deviations from standard so long as you correct quickly, and you may be allowed to repeat a maneuver a second time if it didn't go so well the first time. After the airwork, you might be asked to fly for a few minutes on instruments using a view-limiting device in the real world, demonstrating turns to headings, climbs, and descents. We haven't covered this in our private pilot level lessons since we'll be getting into instrument training in an upcoming series of videos. The examiner will also take control of the aircraft, have you close your eyes, put it in a few unusual attitudes, and then have you recover while on instruments. After your instrument maneuvers, the examiner will have you remove your view-limiting device, probably give you a few minutes to get your bearings, and then possibly pull back the throttle and announce that you've had an engine failure. Follow your procedures and checklists, select your landing area, and fly the airplane until the examiner tells you that the maneuver is over. They'll likely let you fly as low as they safely and legally can before they end the maneuver. You may even possibly be in the vicinity of an airport at which you can take the maneuver to a landing. In the real world, you'll be asked to perform at least one ground reference maneuver when you're down low. These maneuvers help you learn to correct for wind drift, but I haven't included them in this private pilot video series as they're difficult to execute in Flight Simulator, and we learned how to correct for wind drift during our lesson on crosswind landings and traffic patterns. After this, you'll likely head to an airport for your first landing. The examiner will expect you to navigate to the airport, correctly enter the pattern, and make your approach and landing. The first one is likely to be a normal landing, though they could ask for a short or soft field landing. They may even ask you to do a full stop landing rather than a touch and go on the first one to give you a minute to relax and catch your breath on the ground. You'll likely do a few trips around the pattern and demonstrate your short and soft field takeoffs and landings. The examiner may also throw a go-around while you're here as well if they don't feel the technique has been demonstrated elsewhere, such as during your engine failure demo. After the pattern work is complete, the examiner will ask you to set course back to your home base for your final landing. Again, they expect you to be able to navigate there, enter the pattern, and perform a safe landing. If there are any landing types that have not been demonstrated to that point in the ride, you'll be asked to demonstrate it on this final landing. Make sure to maintain vigilance as you taxi in. Remember that during the entire ride, the examiner will be looking to make sure you make good decisions and exercise good judgment. Once you've shut down the engine and secured the aircraft, all that's left is for the examiner to issue you your new temporary certificate, which allows you to exercise the privileges of the new certificate immediately, as you await your permanent certificate from the FAA to arrive in the mail in a few months. As the examiner hands you your new certificate, many will tell you that you've earned a license to learn, and that's exactly what it is. It's a license to explore places you've never been before, to experience new and challenging types of VFR flying, to take on the challenge of instrument flying, to learn to fly aircraft that are faster and more complex, to learn more complex and capable avionics systems, to earn new ratings like your multi-engine rating or your seaplane rating, or to move up to advanced equipment such as turboprops and even jets. Flying, whether in the real world or in Flight Simulator, offers a nearly endless variety of opportunities and challenges to take on. But even if you don't do any of that, a good pilot is always learning, always open to new techniques and new ways of doing things, and always willing to hop back in the cockpit with an instructor to get more proficient. This video concludes our VFR private pilot level series of videos. I sincerely appreciate everyone that's watched, liked, and commented on the videos, and all of you that have subscribed to the channel. It's been an incredible journey, and I'm grateful to those of you who've come along on the ride. Moving forward on this channel, you can look forward to a series of videos on instrument flying, a series of videos where we'll conduct checkout flights on many of the GA airplanes available in Flight Simulator, and a series of training videos on the various avionics that are available in those aircraft. I also plan to continue the series of quick look videos that covers a wide variety of flight sim training topics in shorter videos. If there's a Particular video you'd like to see or a subject you'd like to get some instruction on, let me know in the comments section. I'll also be putting together a quick reference guide and checklist for each aircraft we do a training video on. This will be a PDF document that contains quick reference data like airspeeds and endurance, a checklist for normal ops, and a maneuvers guide. I find these guides helpful as a quick refresher when jumping between the different types of aircraft available in Flight Sim, and I hope you'll find them helpful as well. Pages 3 and 4 of these guides are the checklists and can be printed off on the front and back side of one sheet to make a physical checklist if you'd like to do that. It's organized so that the front side contains all ground operations and the back side contains all flight operations, which is the same way many flight schools and professional flight companies like airlines organize their checklists. The checklists are based on real-world checklists from aircraft manuals for their respective aircraft, though I leave off anything that you don't need to do in flight simulators, such as fastening your seat belt, and in many cases I've reorganized it for a more logical flow in Flight Simulator. Again, the document is a PDF file that can be downloaded and viewed on a computer or tablet using your preferred PDF viewer, or printed if you'd like. The checklist for the 152 is now available on flightsim.to, and I'll leave a link to it in the video description. As always, if you've enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. I try to publish new videos every 2 weeks or so. Again, if there's anything you'd like to see a video about, please let me know in the comments section. The channel is also getting closer to the 1,000 subscriber mark, so hopefully I'll be able to boot up the community page to interact with everyone before too long as well. Again, thanks for everyone for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.